Thank you, Kieran, for the introduction. Tonight, yes, we're talking about revolution in Maynooth, and I'm assisted by Dr. Karina Holton, who's in charge of the illustrations and the PowerPoint here tonight. We have more images, more slides than usual, so it would be very difficult for one person to get through the text and the slides together. I want to begin by quoting Terry Dooley from last year's event. According to Terry, Maynooth has a very strong case to make for being one of Ireland's most historic towns. And I hope this presentation tonight will confirm that viewpoint. While Kildare is regarded as one of the quietest counties during the Irish Revolution, Maynooth was an outlier, with an input into every period in the conflict. The activity in Maynooth was greater than that of any other town in County Kildare. As the revolution progressed, the intensity of militancy in Maynooth increased. By mid-1922, the main street in the town resembled a war zone, with at least 11 houses needing repair. By the end of the conflict, 8 fatalities can be attributed to the militancy in Maynooth. The Irish Revolution began with the Home Rule crisis in 1912, yet there had been 3 incidents in Maynooth which already had a reputation as a revolutionary centre at that time. The first incident involved Donal O'Buchala, Maynooth shopkeeper and prominent Gaelic League activist. Now, the newspapers always refer to him as Donal Buckley, and that's the name I'll be giving during the presentation. In 1905 and 1906, he became embroiled in a conflict with the authorities over a conviction relating to the use of Irish on his cart, which resulted in legal proceedings in the High Court. The case was defended by Patrick Pearse, but the conviction was upheld. Buckley refused to pay the imposed fine, and a roll of tweed was then seized from his shop and auctioned to cover the fine and costs. This in turn was purchased by an admirer of Buckley, who returned it to him. Buckley became well known as a nationalist due to the incident. Also, although the Home Rule crisis began in 1912, 4 years previous, in 1908, an incident connected to the Home Rule political conflict occurred in Maynooth, when a reception for the Duke of Leinster on his coming of age was abandoned by the people of the town when it became known that he had donated £300 to the Unionist Association of Ireland. 3 years later, when King George V visited Maynooth, a group mainly members of the local band opposed the visit. 15 of the 32 band members refused to participate during the visit, and actually 8 of the 15 later fought in the Easter Rising. The membership were mainly moderate nationalists, and this came to light at the time of the split in the movement due to the Redmond's call on the 20th of September 1914 for the volunteers to join the war effort. At a subsequent meeting of the volunteers in Maynooth, 135 of the 157 present at the meeting backed Redmond, and only 22 backed Owen MacNeill. While the Redmondite volunteers largely disintegrated, the 22 who were regarded as advanced nationalists were the core of the volunteers from Maynooth that participated in the Easter Rising. Easter week 1916, Patrick Colgan was the captain of the Maynooth Irish Volunteers, and Patrick Wafer, captain of the Nationalist Volunteers. Wafer actually joined the Irish Volunteer group to participate. Their story of involvement in Dublin is well known, so I'm not going to dwell on it tonight. But the incident in the main street in Maynooth on Easter Tuesday, when Ted O'Kelly threatened two RIC constables, Peter Cleary and Michael Nolan, with his revolver to prevent them from following the volunteers, was the first encounter involving firearms in revolution in Kildare. In fact, the previous encounter in Kildare with firearms was also in Maynooth, 113 years previously, in July 1803, during a failed attempt by Emmet rebels in the town to capture the mail coach. The connection with Maynooth College is of importance to the story of Maynooth, and particularly during the Revolution. In Easter 1916, when volunteers assembled to march to Dublin, it was the college that they proceeded to initially. They had three objectives. First, a meeting with the college president. Second, contact with his personal assistant, John Kenny, who was expected to join them. And third, as part of their plan to confuse the RIC by leaving for Dublin unnoticed by way of the college gate. Monsignor Hogan unsuccessfully attempted to change their minds. However, his advice was adhered to by John Kenny, who did not join up. Now, the next slide shows the blocked up entrance to the canal from Maynooth College. That's the route taken by the Easter Week volunteers in 1916. Not many people here in Maynooth would know about the entrance from Maynooth College to the canal. It's very close to the Ratcoffey Road bridge, and that's the way that they left the college and confused the RIC in the town, who were waiting for them to come back and go through the town. Next slide shows the photo of the 15 men who participated, who marched from Dublin, or from Maynooth to Dublin. There's 14 images of the 15 men there. There's one of them we don't have an image of, and that photograph dates from 1938. In the aftermath of the rising, on the 21st of May, General Maxwell visited Maynooth College to discuss with the President, Monsignor Hogan, the Maynooth rebels' visit to the college on the first day of the rising. One clerical student at the time described General Maxwell's visit as his bloodthirsty task of telling the bishops and the college authorities where their duty lay. At the meeting between Hogan and Maxwell, it was pointed out by Hogan that the spiritual authority of the Catholic Church was not to be interfered with. During the visit, clerical students were confined to their quarters as they had expressed a negative feeling against Maxwell. One participant of the Easter Rising, who was on the run and employed in the college under an assumed name, described the visit and the hostility of the students as follows. As Maxwell was passing along, showers of books and boots descended on him from the windows above, and hoots and catcalls and worse greeted him from the clerical students. So certainly General Maxwell got a frosty reception when he came to Maynooth. In the aftermath of Easter week, severe hardships were experienced by the dependents of the prisoners, and this was a cause of concern. Nearly all the participants in the rising were young men in their early 20s, but two of the Maynooth men were married with young families. While Donald Buckley was a well-to-do shopkeeper, Patrick Kerwin had a wife and 5 young children to support. And one of Kerwin's fellow prisoners, a man little known at the time called Michael Collins, made contact with friends in Cumanamon to seek assistance on his behalf. In May 1916, the Irish Volunteer Dependence Fund and the Irish National Aid Association emerged and began to raise funds. The first published accounts showed a substantial donation from Maynooth College. 14 of the professors, practically the entire teaching staff, contributed £63, with 11 of them donating £5 each. The motivator seemed to be Father Patrick Brown, later known as Monsignor Padraig de Bruin. However, notable among those not contributing was the president, Monsignor Hogan. In addition, the clerical students in the college also made a considerable contribution, amounting to £44. Now that was a considerable contribution, particularly from the clerical students. John Kenny, the president's personal assistant, was active as a collector among the workers in the college. A daughter of Donald Buckley, referred to as Miss Buckley, and Percy Colgan, brother of volunteer leader Patrick Colgan, were active as collectors in the town. Some of these names are names of people that haven't really been recorded in the story of 1916 and Maynooth. Maynooth was pivotal in the reorganisation of the volunteers in County Kildare in early 1917. Michael Collins, then an unknown activist who had become secretary of the National Aid Committee, was also involved in reorganising the volunteers nationally. He had shared a cell in Fongott prison with Maynooth man Patrick Colgan. In February 1917, Collins appointed Colgan as the Kildare organiser. Colgan proceeded to reform companies in various districts and was then appointed battalion commandant. The headquarters of the North Kildare Volunteers at this early stage was in Maynooth. Donald Buckley, aged 50, as one of the oldest participants in the rising, took a back seat in the leadership of the reformed volunteers. Thomas McGee from the Main Street in Maynooth was appointed the commanding officer of the Maynooth Company. The RIC were keeping an eye on Buckley and also the clerical students, and seemed unaware of this volunteer activity. In the illustration, we can see the RIC report of the county inspector, which focuses on the clerical students and not the volunteers. According to the RIC county inspector, Kerry Supple, the community of Maynooth College were not in favour of the rebellion, but I have reason to know, and he emphasises proof, that some of the students were strongly in sympathy, and I believe that many of them were. The most successful constitutional activity during the Irish Revolution was the anti-conscription campaign in 1918. The bishops' meeting in Maynooth College on the 18th of April was crucial in providing the vital link necessary to provide nationalist unity regarding the issue and the means to successfully oppose conscription. Much of the success of the meeting was due to the ingenuity of William Walsh, the Archbishop of Dublin and former president of Maynooth College. He had a major role in successfully obtaining approval for the church to pursue active resistance to conscription, and also had a role in arranging for a delegation from the Mansion House Conference to attend the meeting in Maynooth College, which led to the emergence of the unprecedented unified front consisting of laymen and hierarchy. The immediate consequence of the meeting was the realisation that conscription would be defeated, and that prediction was even recognised at that point following the meeting by some in Dublin Castle. While Maynooth up to mid-1918 had played a leading role in militancy and constitutional disobedience, an activist from the area acquired an important role in the political leadership of the movement in County Kildare. Donald Buckley was proposed as a North Kildare candidate for the Westminster election and was easily elected. Following the local elections in mid-1920, Buckley confirmed his position as the political leader of the independence movement in Kildare, and when he was elected chairman of Kildare County Council. The War of Independence commenced in January 1919, and the militancy began with the Solihull Beg ambush in Tipperary. The volunteers involved in the engagement became the most wanted men in the British Empire, and for a time in May 1919, Maynooth became a safe haven for men on the run, when 5 members of the Tipperary volunteers involved in the Solihull Beg ambush, including Dan Breen, Sean Tracy and Sean Hogan, were given refuge in a house owned by Donald Buckley in Maynooth. Their presence in Maynooth was not detected by the RIC. As I had mentioned earlier, the RIC were more interested in keeping tabs on the clerical students in the college. Throughout 1919, conditions in the country deteriorated, with the RIC particularly impacted. And towards the end of the year, many rural RIC barracks were closed. In early 1920, the closure of barracks in Kildare accelerated, beginning with Leixlip in the first week in March, followed by Kilcock and Maynooth in the following week, with the RIC personnel transferred to Lucan, Naas and Selbridge. The RIC soon realised that evacuating Maynooth barracks was a mistake. In late March 1920, rumours circulating in Maynooth suggested that the local barracks was to be reoccupied on the 25th of March. The barracks is now, many of you will recognise it, it's now Maynooth Garda Station. Immediate action was taken by the IRA, and on the night of the 22nd to the 23rd of March 1920, the local IRA company torched the barracks. The following account of the operation was published in the Leinster Leader. The barracks was occupied by Mrs. Dunn, wife of Sergeant Dunn, and her 5 children, while Sergeant Dunn was at duty in Peamount. Immediately before the burning, a number of men are said to have gone to the barracks and, having escorted the family of Sergeant Dunn to a house in the village, returned to the barracks, after which it was set on fire. That's a good report. It covers everything that happened on the night. Throughout the late spring of 1920, rumours persisted in Maynooth that the Crown forces were planning to re-establish a barrack in Maynooth. Intelligence supplied by Michael Collins suggested that the town hall, situated in the middle of the square, would be commandeered by the RIC for this purpose. The IRA now put in place plans to destroy the building. On the 14th of May, Stephen O'Reilly from the Dublin Brigade carried out the operation with 30 pounds of gelignite. He was assisted by the local IRA, which included Patrick Colgan. Afterwards, O'Reilly was in no hurry to leave Maynooth and retired to Buckley's house, where he enjoyed a leisurely meal before cycling back to Dublin. With no British security presence in the area, Michael Collins himself was able to travel to Maynooth to inspect the damage. And I think there was no end to the hospitalities in Buckley's house, because Michael Collins retired to Buckley's house for a leisurely meal also. The extent to which the IRA controlled North Kildare at this time was clearly visible. Volunteer police patrols were active nightly in Maynooth and Kilcock, enforcing Dáil Éireann licensing laws. Republican courts, presided over by key IRA activists, which included Donald Buckley, replaced the Crown courts. From the point of view of the Dublin Castle authorities, it was an intolerable situation no police presence in North Kildare, and particularly in Maynooth, where the leading Roman Catholic college in the country was sited. Maynooth at the time was regarded by many as having a form of Catholic status due to the college being the headquarters of the Roman Catholic Church in Ireland. I remember in the 60s when I was at primary school, Maynooth was regarded as the capital of Ireland. Dublin was only in the halfpenny place compared to Maynooth. The rumours regarding attempts to establish police barracks in Maynooth continued, and in December 1920, speculation centred on a house known as Leinster Lodge. Now, it was situated between the burnt-out barrack and the entrance into the college, and was owned by relatives of Donald Buckley, who had let it to a veterinary surgeon named James Wade. Now, many of you would know that building today. It's covered in trees, it's vacant, and it's between the Garda station and the entrance into the college. On the night of the 3rd of January 1921, the IRA commandeered the premises. The occupants were locked in one room while men removed the furniture and the car from the adjoining garage. The occupants were then ordered to leave and were accommodated by neighbours. The house was then torched. The raid was well planned. Telephone wires were cut beforehand, and it is known that at least 40 men participated in the operation. The building was completely gutted, with only the walls left standing. The cost of the damage was considerable, with the freeholders of the property claiming £4,000 compensation from the ratepayers. Now, just want to point out, the Maynooth company of the IRA, they kept, when they burned the barracks in Maynooth, they were very careful with the family that were living there, and they had accommodation already in place for the family that lived there. Likewise, with Leinster Lodge, when they burnt Leinster Lodge, again they had a vacant premises for them to bring them to. Dublin Castle's determination to establish a police barracks in Maynooth came to fruition shortly afterwards in mid-January, when Laraine House in the centre of the town was acquired, and a police contingent consisting of regular RIC and Black and Tans were stationed in the building. We'd be familiar with this building. It's in the centre of Maynooth. It had been the local dispensary and the boyhood home of Ted O'Kelly, who had organised the Kildare Volunteers in 1916. The house with adjoining courtyard became the Black and Tan headquarters for North Kildare. It was actually ideal. If any of you just walked to the side of the house and looked into the courtyard was it was probably a building that could be the best defended building in Maynooth. Almost immediately, the Black and Tans made their presence felt. One of the first activities involved an incident in Donald Buckley's shop. On the 27th of January, a party of Black and Tans smashed in the door and threatened Willie Regan, the foreman of the shop. He was ordered to remove the Irish name of the proprietor from the entrance step of the door, and was informed that the building would be blown up if he refused. The raiders then took a pot of red paint from the premises and painted the initials B&T for Black and Tans on the front of the shop, and also the words, "God Save the King." While this was taking place, one of Donald Buckley's daughters ran across the road to the barrack at Laraine House and got the RIC sergeant to intervene, and this diffused the situation. Houses in the town were now regularly searched, which included the residence of the Kenny family, who lived close to Buckley's shop. Arms at this time were hidden in the house, and 23-year-old Ellen Kenny smuggled the guns under her coat while walking from her house to Maynooth College, where they were hidden by her brother John, the personal assistant of the president in the college. This is the same John Kenny that I mentioned earlier on in the presentation. I knew that lady as an elderly woman in the 1960s, and it was afterwards when I heard the story of how she smuggled guns from Maynooth, from the house on the main street, Maynooth, into the college. It's a fact that's not well known that there was guns hidden in Maynooth College during the Irish Revolution. While these events were taking place, the local IRA planned an assault on police patrols that had recommenced in the town. The ambush was organised by Paddy Mullaney, who had been appointed in charge of the local IRA battalion following Patrick Colgan's arrest. On the night of the 21st of February, two IRA parties took up positions, one close to Cavden's Mills, now the Mill Shopping Centre, and it was manned by the Kilcock Company with Mick Flynn in charge. A second party, with Mullaney himself in charge, positioned themselves on the Leixlip side of the town. While the IRA were unsure which direction the police patrol would take, two of the suspected routes were covered. The patrol, consisting of one RIC sergeant and 5 constables walking in single file, headed in the direction of the Kilcock Road. And as they were passing opposite Cavden's Mills, the IRA, concealed in a wall, opened fire, and Sergeant Hughes, who was a 34-year-old and a native of Wolf Hill, County Laois, died in the exchanges before the attackers withdrew. Now, I want to point out that this particular ambush, which would be different to some of the other ambushes. There was 2 other ambushes in Kildare, one an attempted ambush and another at Kill. But this particular ambush was different. It was a hit and run encounter, and the Kilcock men were able to successfully make their escape back to their native area, which was only 3 miles away. They made their escape. They had bicycles concealed in the hedges, and they made their way back by the Lara Road to Kilcock. The Leixlip men on the Dublin Road area of Maynooth likewise escaped unhindered back to Leixlip. Following the ambush, fears of retaliation by the Black and Tans in Maynooth led to an almost complete evacuation of the civilian population from the town. However, unlike the aftermath of ambushes at Kill and Balbriggan, where reprisals occurred, no harm was inflicted. The fact that the Catholic college was situated in the town may have saved Maynooth from retaliation, as the Dublin Castle authorities were anxious to avoid negative publicity associated with Maynooth. Nevertheless, a curfew was subsequently imposed from 9 p.m. to 5 p.m. and also certain restrictions which prohibited any fairs or markets being held within a 2-mile radius of the new barracks in Maynooth was imposed. Following the ambush, RIC patrols in Maynooth continued, and the likelihood of further attacks by the IRA had a detrimental mental effect on the police. 2 weeks after the ambush, on the 7th of March, Constable Harold Stiff, a Black and Tan from Canning Town in London, died from self-inflicted wounds in a room in the barrack. Stiff was due to take part on patrol duty, and targeting of patrols by the IRA was a contributing factor to the suicide. I read the reports, and I'm satisfied that that suicide was very much linked to that constable having to engage in patrol duty that night. In the run-up to the truce in July 1921 and afterwards, both sides continued to engage in intelligence gathering. An IRA intelligence report from July 1921 indicated that there were 4 sergeants and 25 men stationed in Maynooth RIC barracks. Another report from the following September specified that the number of men had reduced from 25 to 16, and that District Inspector Michael Fallon was permanently attached to Maynooth since the truce. So there had been a reduction of RIC in Maynooth from the time of the truce. A report from the RIC County Inspector, Victor Scott, to his superiors, also at that time, focused on Maynooth College, where he claimed the president, Father McCaffrey, was not a supporter of the Republicans and that he had expelled 9 clerical students due to their Republican views. Actually, the 9 students were students who were dropping out. The RIC continually focused on the college and even reporting on gossip of whether regardless of whether it was misinformation or not. But the writing was on the wall regarding the black and tan presence in Maynooth. Following the treaty, the disengagement of Crown forces began, and on the morning of the 24th of March 1922, the remaining RIC and black and tans in Maynooth vacated the barracks, which was then handed over to the Provisional Government representatives, Captain McKenna and Liaison Officer Sean Kavanagh. It's noteworthy that the local IRA company, who had contributed to the disbandment of the RIC, were excluded. This was due to the split in the movement due to the treaty. Shortly after the treaty, there was a reorganisation of the Maynooth, of the North Kildare IRA battalion, which was divided into 2 new battalion areas, one with Paddy Maloney in charge and the other with Mick Flynn in command. Maynooth was in Maloney's area of command, and the local IRA in this area chose the anti-treaty side in the divide. The IRA in Mick Flynn's area of command went pro-treaty. We can see there in the map the various divisions of the IRA battalion areas at that time. The next map there shows the location of barracks in North Kildare in late 1922. Now, this was just before the Civil War commenced. We can see that the barracks there that are in black are pro-treaty IRA barracks, and the barracks in red are anti-treaty IRA barracks. Now, when I say pro-treaty, I'd have to use the 2 terms, pro-treaty and National Army. It was, I think, in late July that they were all referred to as National Army. But at that time, in late June, for instance, in Lucan, it was the pro-treaty IRA and the National Army. Yes. The Civil War began. I just want to, before I move away from that slide, I just want to point out in Maynooth, there was 4 anti-treaty barracks on the map there. Blessington, of course, is outside the county. Kill was abandoned, and the Kill anti-treaty IRA moved to Coolcarrigan, where there was the principal anti-treaty IRA camp outside Dublin was situated. But in Maynooth, the anti-treaty side in Maynooth operated from a barrack that they had established in the centre of the town, in the middle of the main street. The Civil War began with the attack on the forecourts in Dublin on the 28th of June 1922. Almost simultaneously, the National Army and pro-treaty IRA set about rounding up prominent activists associated with the anti-treaty movement, with checkpoints set up on all of the leading roads. The following day, Paddy Mullaney and Donald Buckley were among those arrested by Mick Flynn at a checkpoint in Kilcock. Now, I just want to point out that these people were all comrades, and they were. The split had occurred just when it had widened after the attack on the forecourts. Mullaney, before he left the barrack in Maynooth, where he was operating from, he had appointed Thomas Mangan in charge of the anti-treaty side while he was absent from Maynooth. The focus of attention now turned to Maynooth, where another example of divided loyalties emerged at this time. Intelligence relating to anti-treaty militancy was passed on to the National Army authorities by Patrick Colgan, a former local IRA battalion officer OC, who spent 5 days in the family home in Maynooth during the early days of the Civil War. Colgan, a friend of Michael Collins, was a supporter of the treaty and was employed by the provisional government in the Ministry of Economics. On the 5th of July, he sent a report on anti-treaty activity in Maynooth to Dermot O'Hegarty, providing names and addresses of 5 local militants, which included Thomas Mangan, Tim Terrell, and Patrick Kerwin, who were fellow colleagues during Easter week in 1916. He also named activists from other areas close to Maynooth. I'm not going to name the other activists, but I see they're close relatives of some of those other activists that he reported on here with us tonight. And I'm not going to mention any names. And don't look at the direction that I'm looking. Anyway, many of the activists lived within 50 yards of his home, and some had been his school colleagues. Colgan also reported that anti-treaty activists in Maynooth were holding a brother of Mick Flynn as a prisoner in their barrack in the main street in Kilcock. What had happened was, we all know what occurred in the forecourts. In the forecourts, one of the leading pro-treaty officers, Ginger O'Connell, was arrested, or I won't say arrested, he was kidnapped, and he was held in the forecourts. And it was something similar that was happening here. There was a barrack here in Maynooth, an anti-treaty barrack in Maynooth, manned by the anti-treaty side. In Kilcock, there was a pro-treaty barrack. And when Donald Buckley and Paddy Mullaney were arrested in Kilcock and held in the barrack in Kilcock by the man who's in charge in Kilcock, Mick Flynn. Mick Flynn's brother was not too far away from Maynooth, and he was taken into custody. And now that I've left my notes, it's going to be very difficult for me to find where he was. Anyway, the first shots fired in the Civil War in North Kildare occurred on the 29th of June, when a car with National Army soldiers from Kilcock Barrack arrived in the main street in Maynooth, apparently in an operation to free the prisoner. Anti-treaty IRA members who were patrolling in the street opened fire on the car. Fire was returned by the soldiers, who had far superior weaponry. As a result, the anti-treaty activists retreated, and the prisoner, believed to be Peter Flynn, escaped. Despite this setback, Maynooth anti-treaty activists escalated their activities. Mangan mobilised reinforcements from the surrounding towns and engaged in communication disruptions that would be disrupting rail transport and also blocking roads. On the evening of the 1st of July, the anti-treaty side established a new base in Maynooth when they occupied and barricaded 2 houses at the corner of the junction of the main street with the Dublin Road. Today, one of the buildings is a restaurant. Many of us know it, the Avenue. The Battle of Dublin during the Civil War ended on the 5th of July. The first town targeted by the National Army after Dublin was Maynooth. On the 6th of July, a unit under the command of Commandant Seamus Finn from Lucan Barracks advanced to Maynooth in a number of vehicles to quell the resistance and arrest the activists. Finn knew many of the activists as he had operated as IRA trainer for County Kildare during a short period in 1921. Reports survive from both sides of the encounter in Maynooth. The following is a report by Finn sent to General Richard Mulcahy. I commanded an attack on Maynooth successfully this morning. The executive forces, that's the anti-treaty side, were not in the position I thought they would be. They were scattered through the town. We captured 14 men, 3 rifles and 3 shotguns. We have established a temporary post of 15 men at the railway station. Our men, splendid, encircling movement carried out by them in fine style. According to Mangan, he'd be given the report from the anti-treaty side, the National Army arrived from all sides and began firing indiscriminately. His assertion that about 300 National Army troops surrounded the place and kept up firing for 2 hours seems to be a bit somewhat exaggerated. Nevertheless, considerable firepower was used as substantial damage was caused to 10 houses in the town. The roofs and external walls of numbers 2, 3 and 4 on the south side of the main street were severely damaged, while the roofs on 4 houses from numbers 5 to 8 were damaged beyond repair. The total damage, which included the cost of re-roofing a number of the houses, amounted to £4,540. As the National Army lorry drove through Maynooth with the soldiers arresting suspects, Jim O'Keefe, a leading anti-treaty IRA battalion staff officer from Kilcock, was spotted, and a quick surrender was expected. However, the army unit were unfamiliar with O'Keefe's reputation and experience as an activist. Cool and defiant, O'Keefe stood his ground, and as the National Army vehicle approached, and as it came within range, he produced a hand grenade and threw it into the lorry. But the grenade failed to explode. The occupants, expecting another grenade to be hurled, immediately jumped from the vehicle and took cover, which allowed O'Keefe ample time to make good his escape. This encounter was one of the most daring episodes by any single Kildare activist during the decade of revolution in Kildare, and it has received little publicity. Commandant Finn's report made no mention of the grenade incident. The anti-treaty side had no option but to disperse, and due to the National Army base established in Maynooth train station, further resistance was limited. The Maynooth anti-treaty activists were all picked up within weeks and interned in Dundalk prison. Now, the prison had been taken over from the British authorities, and the conditions in the prison were described by the prisoners as inhuman. Many of those prisoners had been in prison before during the War of Independence, and they were released at Christmas 1921, and now they were back in prison, and the conditions were worse under the provisional government regime, as they referred. Anyway, a protest by the prisoners met with heavy-handed treatment, but they engaged in a hunger strike, and after a 3-day hunger strike, the prisoners' demands were met. One of the Maynooth men was assaulted during the protest, Patrick Kerrigan. I mentioned him earlier, and he gave details of, I got a blow of the butt of a rifle and was knocked down and got several blows and kicks on the ground. That's just one of the accounts of the protest by one of the Maynooth prisoners. Two of the biggest gun battles during the Irish Revolution involving Kildare IRA volunteers occurred outside the county. The first was during Easter week 1916, was in Dublin. The second was during the Civil War in August 1922, when in excess of 80 fully armed freed prisoners from the northern section of the county participated in running battles with the National Army in County Meath. They had been imprisoned in Dundalk and released following the capture of the prison by anti-treaty forces under Frank Aiken. At that point, they were given firearms and sent back to their various districts. The largest proportion of freed prisoners from any district was from Maynooth. In all, 19 of the freed prisoners had Maynooth addresses. Many of them were closely related, such as Donald Buckley and his nephew Cahill. Patrick Kerwin, who I mentioned there a few minutes ago, and his son Christopher were also among the prisoners. And there were sets of brothers which included Thomas Mangan and his brother John. Also, the brothers Jim and Pat O'Keefe from Kilcock. That's the same Jim O'Keefe that I mentioned previously. So the prisoners made their way back to North Kildare from Dundalk. Having covered a distance of more than 38 miles in 32 hours, the Kildare men were trapped in the general area of Skryne by the National Armies. Now, there's a hill in Skryne, and it was in that area where they were trapped. The National Army, when they got the reports of the prisoners making their way south from Dundalk prison, they scrambled units from Dundalk, from Drogheda, Trim and Dublin. The Maynooth men were part of a party of about 40 who were discovered in a field by the National Army, and immediately fire was opened by a Lewis gun, with troops advancing from their lorries in flanking movements on the right and left around the field. Heavy firing by both sides followed as the troops closed in on the position. Thomas Mangan from Maynooth describes the scene. "We came across Free State lorries and a kind of semi-armoured car. It was a case of rush and get whatever cover we could. We kept up fire, and when they turned machine guns on us, we had no chance. We kept up the fire. The fight lasted about half an hour, with all of the Maynooth men in the group recaptured. While most of the men were in their 20s, 51-year-old Patrick Kerwin from Maynooth was the oldest man in that particular group. Patrick Keogh, a National Army soldier, was killed in the encounter during the recapture of the prisoners. The best known prisoner to be freed from Dundalk was Donald Buckley, who at 56 was the oldest prisoner to be freed. Due to his age, he was persuaded to catch a train to Dublin, where he discreetly spent the remainder of the Civil War, staying mainly with his sister Joanna in Rathmines. Some of them managed to escape at Skryne and made their way back to North Kildare. And some of the escaped prisoners joined a new anti-treaty IRA column, which was formed by Paddy Mullaney. One of the Maynooth activists, Tim Terrell, an Easter week veteran who had avoided arrest, joined the column, which became known as the Leixlip column. They were active from September to December in the north of the county. In late November, the column raided several premises in Maynooth, which included Joseph Dawson's shop and the post office run by Alexander Caulfield. There were no National Army or Civic Guard presence in Maynooth at the time, and the column were virtually able to take over the town. The Army authorities acted promptly, and later that night established a temporary National Army post of 17 men under Captain Joe Ledwick at Maynooth train station. Now, Ledwick was one of the Maynooth Easter week men. The following morning, 3 National Army soldiers left Lucan Barracks with rations for the Ledwick party in Maynooth train station. But the lorry broke down halfway between Leixlip and Maynooth, and within a short time they were ambushed by a party of the Leixlip column. 2 of the soldiers were captured and a 3rd soldier escaped, and on reaching Maynooth, this soldier raised the alarm. The 2 captured soldiers were taken to Grange William House, which is situated about a half a mile south of Pike Bridge, which had earlier been occupied by the Leixlip column. Captain Ledwick in Maynooth, on receiving details from the soldier who had escaped capture, immediately contacted Army units requesting reinforcements. Now, the party of the Leixlip column who were in Grange William, if they had cut the wires, the telephone wires, the Maynooth contingent in the new in the train stations, this is the National Army men, they would not have been able to have communicated with their with the other units. Ledwick, with a combined party of 24 men, left Maynooth and proceeded by foot to Pike Bridge, and immediately came under fire from the Leixlip column, who were fortified in Donoughmore Graveyard and Grange William House. Many of us who know Pike Bridge would know the graveyard there, and would also know of the stud farm in which Grange William is in the centre. Within a short time, Ledwick's unit were joined by reinforcements from Dublin, consisting of 7 officers and 40 men, with 1 whippet armoured car, 1 Fiat and 5 tenders. They were also joined by additional reinforcements from Naas. The battle at Pike Bridge was to last for several hours, with the National Army outflanking the Leixlip column at the rear close to Connolly Folly, and eventually forcing them to withdraw into the nearby fields, but not before losing one of their men, Private Joe Morden, who was fatally wounded. The extent of the firepower at this stage was immense. The exchanges by both sides, armed with machine guns, rifles and automatic pistols, and with armoured cars operating, had never been witnessed previously in Kildare. And I've heard from some people in Maynooth and Selbridge that they were told by their parents that they could hear 3 minutes left. They were told by their parents that they could hear the gunfire right throughout the day while that operation was going on. At 4 o'clock, a National Army unit spotted the entire Leixlip column. Following an exchange of fire lasting 10 minutes, 22 men surrendered with their arms and ammunition. 3 of the column were wounded. 2 Maynooth men, I want to point out, were on opposite sides in this encounter. Joe Ledwick of the National Army and Tim Terrell of the Leixlip column. And both, as mentioned earlier, were members of the Maynooth company that had participated in Easter week. The Pike Bridge encounter during the Civil War was one of the most intense military engagements in County Kildare during the entire Irish Revolution, with machine guns in operation on both sides. Oh, Jesus Christ, Monsignor. 5 of the captured column were National Army deserters wearing National Army uniforms, and they were subsequently executed. One of them was a local man, Anthony Riley from Selbridge, who was interred in Donnacumper Cemetery. Joe Moran, the fatality from the National Army, was from Kilcock and is interred in the local St. Joseph Cemetery in an unmarked grave. Now, we're coming to the end of the presentation, and I just want to give a short account on Maynooth College and Father Patrick Brown, who I mentioned earlier. The Civil War executions were to become the most controversial aspect of the militancy connected to Maynooth during the Irish Revolution. One of the professors in Maynooth College, Father Patrick Brown, previously mentioned, took issue with the pro-treaty authorities regarding the executions. While constrained by a bishop's directive, he found a way of commemorating executed Republicans. In late July 1922, W.T. Cosgrave complained to the Archbishop of Dublin, Dr. Byrne, accusing a number of priests in the diocese, one of which was Father Brown of Maynooth College, of treasonable acts. Father Brown was suspected of visiting Republicans and hearing their confessions, thereby encouraging them in the early days of the war. The inactivity of the bishops during the executions was described by Patrick Brown as the blackest stain on the Irish priesthood since the coming of St. Patrick. Powerless to publicly condemn the executions, he penned poetry to express his views. His poetic commemoration of O'Connor, Mellows, Barrett and McKelvey, 4 anti-treaty prisoners executed on the 8th of December 1922, was widely circulated throughout 1923. During a raid on Sinn Féin headquarters in Dublin in February 1922, Father Brown was arrested and accused of possessing seditious documents. The document in question was a poem he penned, which extolled the activities of the 5 members of the Leixlip column who were executed in January 23 following the Pike Bridge encounter. He was the only priest from County Kildare arrested during the Irish Revolution, and was arrested and was released after 4 days in Mountjoy. Father Patrick Brown, later known as Monsignor Padraig de Bruin, served as Professor of Mathematics in Maynooth College from 1914 to 45, and afterwards as President of Maynooth College, or of University College Galway. Certainly, there are few towns in Ireland that had an involvement in the Irish Revolution as extensive as Maynooth. While Donald Buckley is regarded as the best-known activist from the town during the period, this presentation, hopefully, has gone some way to identify others who have been overlooked and also detail an important role played by Maynooth College.